World War II in the Pacific ended on a somewhat anticlimactic note, at least at sea. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 saw the Imperial Japanese Navy being crushed as an effective fighting force, and they never again mounted a significant offensive operation. Arguably, the exception to that was Operation Tengo, which was the last suicidal sortie of the battleship Yamato, which was ultimately sunk in a large airstrike. And with the conclusion of the Battle of Okinawa in June 1945, there were still 2 months of hostilities to go. As planning for Operation Downfall, the Allied invasion of Japan, was underway, the US Navy's submarine force was still hard at work patrolling the waters of the Pacific and enforcing a naval blockade on Japan, just as it had been doing since the United States entered the war back on 7 December 1941. While the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on 6 and 9 August 1945, respectively, generally signaled the end of the war, it would still be 6 more days before Japan's leadership would announce capitulation. As it turns out, those 6 days would see some of the final shots of the war, some of which came from a US submarine. The final submarine battle of World War II was fairly conventional by most standards. It involved a submarine and a few surface ships. The combatants were as follows. USS Torsk, SS-423, is a Tench-class submarine. Her World War II career was fairly short, as she was commissioned in December 1944 and only did 2 war patrols before the war ended. The Tench-class submarines were a further refinement of the previous Baleo class, with rearranged fuel and ballast tanks. Additionally, they had the latest models of machinery and equipment, and notably, new slow-speed direct-drive electric motors, which eliminated the need for bulky reduction gears. Externally, the Tench class was virtually identical in appearance to the Baleo class, except for a sharper knuckle at the base of the stem. That said, they were generally equal in performance to the Baleo class. Standard displacement for a Tench-class submarine is 1,570 tons surfaced and 2,415 tons submerged. They have an overall length of 311 feet 8 inches and a beam of 27 feet 3 inches. Their test depth is nominally 400 feet. For a power plant, they are powered by 4 Fairbanks Morse 38D 8.5 10-cylinder diesel engines, providing 5,400 shaft horsepower, which power 4 General Electric main generators. They also have 1 Fairbanks Morse 35A5 1/4 7-cylinder auxiliary diesel engine, 2 General Electric main motors providing 2,740 shaft horsepower, and 2 126-cell batteries. They have 2 shafts. In terms of maximum speed, they can do 20.25 knots surfaced and 8.75 knots submerged. They have a range of 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. For armament, they're generally armed with 1 to 2 5-inch 25 caliber deck guns. They have 6 bow and 4 stern torpedo tubes, and they can carry a maximum of 28 torpedoes. However, they can also carry 40 mines maximum, with 2 mines in place of 1 torpedo. Nominally, they would have a crew of 81. The other combatant were Type C Kaibokan. Kaibokan itself literally just means sea or ocean defense ship. The Kaibokan were several classes of small coastal defense and escort ships used by the Imperial Japanese Navy relatively late in the war, roughly equivalent in firepower and role to that of a destroyer escort, a frigate, or even a Coast Guard cutter. With unprotected merchant ship losses mounting, Japan sought to rapidly increase the production of its escort forces. Ordered under the 1943-44 and 1944-45 building programs, the Type C Kaibokan was a simplified variant of the earlier Ukuru type, also known as a modified Type B escort. Electric welding was used in the construction of the hull, and sections of the vessel were prefabricated to increase production speed. The result was a vessel that could be built in as little as 3 months, although a lack of materials often meant construction times were as long as 8 months for these vessels. The Type C were constructed at various dockyards including Mitsubishi, Kobe, Tsurumi, Nihon Kai Dock, Tayama, Maizuru Dockyard, Naniwa Osaka, and Kyowa Osaka. In exchange from the earlier Ukuru type, the Type C featured a lower funnel and a longer forecastle. While still diesel-powered, they had less horsepower than the previous Ukuru class, at 1900 brake horsepower, which resulted in a 3-knot decrease in speed with a top speed of 16 knots. This was barely enough to allow the Type Cs to keep up with a merchant convoy or even chase submarines. Still, they were regarded as very seaworthy, although ballast had to be added to the stern to trim out the vessel and prevent the bow from plunging into the waves. The general characteristics for a Type C Kaibokan escort were as follows. They had a displacement of 745 tons. They were 221 feet 6 inches in length overall. They had a beam of 27 feet 6 inches and a draft of 9 feet 6 inches. They were powered by diesel engines generating 1,900 brake horsepower, operating 2 shafts. They had a maximum speed of 16.5 knots, and they can go 6,500 nautical miles at 14 knots. For armament, they normally had 2 4.7-inch dual-purpose guns, 6 25mm AA guns in 2 triple mounts, although this was often increased to 12 to 16 25mm guns in the year 1944 and 1945. They also carried 1 3-inch trench mortar, and could have 12 depth charge throwers, with a total of 120 depth charges. Their nominal crew complement was 136 men. Torsk's last war patrol. At the start of August 1945, USS Torsk departed Guam for her second war patrol. On 10 August, she used her FM sonar to detect mines and safely passed through the Tsushima Strait and into the Sea of Japan. The next day, 11 August, Torsk rescued 7 Japanese merchant seamen who were clinging to a life raft. Their cargo ship, the Koemaru, had been sunk several days earlier by U.S. aircraft. Torsk then continued on to her patrol area, entering it that afternoon. At 0830 on 12 August, Torsk was submerged at periscope depth and torpedoed a small coastal freighter near Dogo Island, scoring her first kill of the patrol. The following day, 13 August, Torsk sank the freighter Kaihomaru and pursued a larger cargo vessel that managed to escape to the safety of Wakasa Harbor. On the morning of 14 August, Torsk sighted a larger cargo ship off the town of Amarube, accompanied by the Kaibokan No. 13 escort vessel, and pursued it as it headed east. A further 3 miles east, as the freighter approached the town of Kasumi Hyogo, Torsk fired a Mark 28 acoustic homing torpedo at the escort at 10:35. The torpedo successfully hit and blew the stern of Kaibokan No. 13 up at a 30-degree angle. She sank shortly thereafter at 35 degrees 41 minutes north, 134 degrees 35 minutes east. The merchant ship she was pursuing escaped to the safety of a nearby harbor about a half hour later. Reportedly, Torsk attempted to torpedo this merchant ship while she was in the harbor, but the torpedo struck a shallow reef. Around 1200, another escort vessel, Kaibokan No. 47, approached and located Torsk on her sonar. Torsk fired a Mark 28 torpedo at her, which ultimately missed, dove to 400 feet, and initiated silent running. Torsk then fired 2 Mark 27 QD torpedoes on sonar bearings at the Kaibokan. At 12:25, lookouts on Kaibokan No. 47 spotted the torpedo wakes and attempted to take evasive action. Reportedly, 1 torpedo found its target and exploded against the ship's stern, where she developed a starboard list and sank at 35 degrees 42 minutes north and 134 degrees 36 minutes east 10 minutes later. It should be noted that there are some discrepancies between sources regarding the freighter that Torsk was pursuing, the types of torpedoes it fired, and the order in which the escorts were sunk, as well as the positions of their sinking, which I'll describe a little bit later on. For the next 7 hours, Torsk was held down by aircraft and other escort vessels before she was able to escape. After surfacing, she headed for the Noto Peninsula further northwest. The following day, 15 August, Emperor Hirohito went on the radio and announced to the Japanese people that they would have to, quote-unquote, bear the unbearable. Japan had finally surrendered. Torsk remained on patrol in the Sea of Japan until 3 September when she passed back through the Tsushima Strait and set a course for the Marianas, arriving at Guam on the 9th and completing her second and final war patrol. Torsk's service continued after the war. She underwent a fleet snorkel conversion in 1952, which, unlike other submarines that received the more expensive guppy conversion, was a very austere conversion and involved providing snorkels and a streamlined sail structure to those submarines. Torsk's post-war service also included several deployments to the Mediterranean, and she was decommissioned on 4 March 1964. She currently sits in Baltimore, Maryland, where she has operated as a museum ship since 26 September 1972. Thus, Torsk fired the last torpedo shots of World War II and became the last U.S. Navy submarine to fire torpedoes in anger, at least thus far. Now, it's important to note here that U.S. Navy submarines have fired live torpedoes, although those have only been in exercises since then, such as a SINKEX. But Torsk was the last submarine to fire a torpedo at an actual enemy target. Now, there are several discrepancies in the narratives about the events on 14 August, depending on what source is used. The identity of the freighter that Torsk was pursuing on the 14th is unknown. Kimmett and Regis, in their book U.S. Navy Submarines in World War II An Illustrated History, imply that this was the same ship that Torsk was pursuing the previous day, which had escaped to Wakasa Harbor. However, Wakasa Harbor and the city of Maizuru are nearly 40 miles away from the towns of Amarube and Kasumi as the crow flies. While the freighter may have returned to that area on the 14th, no source mentions the name of this vessel and the direction that it was traveling in, or its destination. In all likelihood, it was a different merchant ship. Regarding what types of torpedoes Torsk fired at the escorts on the 14th, Kimmett and Regis write that only Mark 27 QD torpedoes were used. Conversely, the Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships notes that Mark 28 torpedoes were fired at both Kaibokans and sank the first one, but missed the second. These were followed by a Mark 27 that hit and sank the last Kaibokan. Similarly, Bob Hackett, Sandra Kingsep, and Peter Kundal, in the Tabular Record of Movement, or TROM, for Kaibokan number 47, write that Mark 28s were fired at both Kaibokans and sank 47, but missed 13. However, the two Mark 27s that were later fired at 13 both hit and sank it. On the other hand, the TROM for Kaibokan number 13 records that only one Mark 27 hit number 13. And Kimmett and Regis similarly write that the last Kaibokan was hit by only a single torpedo. The order and position in which the Kaibokans sank are also disputed. Both TROMs from CombinedFleet.com note that number 47 was sunk first, followed by number 13. In contrast, Kimmett and Regis say that 13 was sunk first. The table on the blog post I wrote shows the coordinates of the sinkings given by various different sources, as well as a map where I've calculated out the coordinates for those sinkings. Strangely, as seen in the table and the map, the TROM for number 47, as well as the official chronology of the US Navy in World War II, the Wikipedia article for number 47, and Hans-Georg Jenschura, Dieter Jung, and Peter Mickel's book Warships of the Imperial Japanese Navy, 1869 to 1945, note that either Kaibokan number 47 or both ships were sunk at the exact same coordinates, as I've indicated by a green marker on the map. It's highly unlikely that both ships were sunk in the exact same spot. The TROM for number 13, as well as the Wikipedia article for Kaibokan number 13, gives different coordinates for both ships, as can be seen by the red markers on the map. Now, I've gone with these positions and the red markers in my above narrative. Finally, the official chronology of the US Navy in World War II gives Kaibokan number 13's position as further north of all of these, as shown by the blue marker indicated on the map. Realistically, unless these wrecks have been surveyed in the modern era, it's probably worth taking these coordinates with a grain of salt, since navigation in the 1940s was not nearly as accurate as it is today. At the very least, all sources seem to agree that these escorts were sunk just north of the towns of Amarube and Kasumi in Hyogo, Japan. At any rate, that is the story of USS Torsk, and becoming the final submarine in the US Navy to fire the last torpedo shots in anger.